In July of 1987, a bulldozer rolled onto a stretch of coastal land north of San Diego and flattened the most famous skate park in America. The park was called Del Mar Skate Ranch, and a teenager named Tony Hawk had just landed his first professional contest win there 5 years earlier. For the growing skateboarding subculture, this demolition was a significant loss. However, for many of other Californians, the demolition was seen as long overdue. This was not an isolated case, as at the time, many skate parks were earmarked for demolition or abandonment, and the scale was significant. Consider this: California had built over 100 of these parks in the late 1970s, yet by 1981, only a handful remained. The ironic part is that without designated places to practice, urban features like handrails, stairs, and waxed curbs became improvised substitutes in a variation of the sport known as street skating. And as skateboarders took to the street en masse, communities expressed their outrage politically. The sentiment was perhaps best stated by a city mayor who claimed he, quote, knew virtually nothing about skateboarding, except that he instinctively hated it. And despite all of that, skating is now a widely respected, economically powerful sport. In fact, it has since become an official sport of the Olympics. So why did California once go to war with skateboarding, and what remains of those original parks? Stay tuned to find out as we explore the history of California's lost skate parks. I'm your host Ryan Sokash, and you're watching It's History. Let's go back to the 1950s, when California surfers were experimenting by bolting roller skate wheels onto planks of wood to ride the sidewalks. This early DIY movement, often called sidewalk surfing, was born directly out of a desire to mimic the fluid, carving motions of ocean surfing when the Pacific was completely flat. And it should be said that the earliest boards were often very crude, made out of things like pieces of lumber found at construction sites. The evolution to shaped decks was a pivotal moment in manufacturing, meaning that for the first time, the board was designed to follow the natural arc of a human turn, rather than providing just a flat surface to ride on. Despite the dangers, it caught on fast. By the end of the decade, surf shops noticed the trend, and so they began manufacturing the first commercial skateboards, swapping out raw planks for shaped decks resembling mini surfboards to lean heavily into that coastal aesthetic. The word skateboard first reached print in a 1959 LA Times report, and the subject of that report was Pasadena moving to ban sidewalk surfing. In other words, even back then, parts of society were not exactly too enthusiastic about the sport. You see, the menacing noise of the wheels on concrete and the perceived threat to pedestrians made the activity an easy target for ridicule, and so it didn't take long for bans to spread throughout the state. Even so, the movement couldn't be stopped. The youth loved it, and by 1977, skateboarding had become a business. And beyond that, a catalyst occurred that propelled the sport into the spotlight in a way that nothing else could. A story perhaps best recalled by our guest, Tony Hawk.
If you really look back at where did skating start, especially with more aerial type of skating, that started in pools. And the reason it started in pools was because there was a drought in the 70s in California, and many pool owners, I'd say a majority of them, drained their pools as a response to this drought. And also, they don't want to they don't want to look bad. Well, they have abundance of water and no one else does. The surfers that were skaters at the time realized that these pools emulated waves. They started hopping fences and skating in these backyard pools that were empty, or, going in and cleaning them up, taking mops and buckets and making them rideable. And then that became the sort of boom of skating in the late 70s. And skate parks started to get built to emulate pools. That is literally why they built them. And so they were hiring pool contractors to build skate parks in those days.
The press took note, and the era became defined as pool culture. As the 1970s progressed, skaters began looking for vertical surfaces, walls that went straight up. Considering the almost mystical maneuvers skaters were undertaking, photography also became intertwined with the sport. And as images of the most radical stunts began to circulate, the sport gained popularity.
It almost started at Spring Valley. Spring Valley was a skate park in San Diego, and my dad took me there, and their age limit was 12 years old. So I couldn't get a membership because I was 10 or 11 at the time. Oasis was, I think, 10 and up. So I ended up going there and skating there almost until the days they closed. The first skate park in San Diego, and arguably one of the first skate parks in the world, was Carlsbad Skate Park. That park did not get demolished. It closed, but it was there for decades. And we actually, my dad took us there to go try to skate it because we heard some people could sneak in and hop the fence and skate it. And we were greeted by a guy coming out of his RV with a shotgun because he was the security for the property. And my dad tried to talk him into letting us skate, which was just so my dad. Like
the guy with the
go
shotgun.
for it. Yeah, he said, he goes, they're not hurting anything. He's like, well, they ain't going in there. But the other skate park in San Diego that did stay open was Del Mar Skate Ranch, and I just happened to live 15 minutes from there.
Del Mar was designed by the staff of a swimming pool service company, and its signature was a deep concrete bowl shaped like a keyhole, where riders attempted maneuvers that had never been done before.
Oh, in its prime, it was just bustling. It was exciting. You'd go there and it was like the American show Cheers. Like, hey, you should know everyone. It became sort of your salvation. And the sessions there were a blast. And then people would come from all over the world because they knew of this iconic park and they knew of the skaters. And so you would end up meeting people from all over Europe, Russia even, and they would make this pilgrimage to Del Mar Skate Ranch. And a lot of them would, didn't have money. They would sleep. They had trampolines there that you could pay for time on the trampolines in addition to miniature golf. I mean, that just shows you what skateboarding was viewed as. It was viewed as more of a toy activity.
Yeah,
because those are the other elements to the space. But people would come and sleep on the trampolines after hours so they could skate Del Mar.
Behind the scenes, a storm was brewing, as the sport has always had one very inconvenient legal aspect. It can be very unsafe.
People who choose skating and do it seriously, they just know risk is a factor. They know it, and they accept it. And sometimes that, if you get a really traumatic injury, that can be the turning point where it's like, this is not for me for a career.
Vert skating carried riders up the walls of the bowl and launched them into the air well above the lip. However, the higher they went, the further they would fall.
When I first started skating, every new move that I learned, and I'm not talking about something that had never been done, I'm talking about like just learning the moves that existed at the time, gave me a sense of validation that I didn't have anywhere else, in any other sport, in any other activity. And then when I started to learn tricks that had never been done, and granted, these tricks were not moving the needle. They weren't even really noticed. That gave me a sense of that I could create something, and I could literally create art. And I had never felt that way in my life. Like I played violin, I did art and stuff. I played baseball and basketball, but I just never felt like I was excelling at those things. I wasn't getting better at them in a way that I can measure. Every time I went skating, I got better at it. And I didn't mind the repetition, the exhaustion to get to a trick, even the injuries. They were just more of a nuisance. And you can say whatever, you can say it's high pain tolerance. You can say it's, that I have this sort of daredevil gene that I don't understand or accept my own mortality, but that's not true. I don't want to get hurt. I don't like it. I'm not a glutton for punishment.
Of course.
But I value sometimes those mini traumas, even major traumas, for the sake of learning and for the sake of progressing and not making the same mistakes.
So as the tricks escalated, so too did the gravity of the injuries and lawsuits that followed. And this was a trigger point for skateboarding's first downfall. Throughout the late 1970s and 80s, a wave of injury lawsuits hit skate park operators, and the underwriters who covered those parks responded by tightening their terms and driving insurance premiums up. To better understand the insurance company's perspective, we have to talk about the attractive nuisance doctrine. This legal principle suggests that certain properties may attract children and endanger them because children cannot properly assess safety. The clause typically addresses common dangers like children entering backyard swimming pool areas or spaces with heavy machinery. And because skate parks were designed specifically to be exciting and attractive to the youth, they were the perfect targets for this doctrine. Insurance companies began to view skate parks as liability traps. To make the situation worse, most parks were small operations running on thin margins. They couldn't absorb the cost. Consider the numbers. In 1978, a skate park's annual liability insurance premium might have been around $3,000. By 1980, underwriters were demanding upwards of $50,000 to $100,000 a year if they offered coverage at all. Iconic parks, such as the Runway in Carson or the Oasis in San Diego, saw their premiums skyrocket to over 1,000% in a single calendar year. For a business charging just $2 a session, survival was mathematically impossible. And so one after another, they let their coverage lapse and they just locked their gates and walked away. By 1980, only a small handful of skate parks were left anywhere in the country.
When Upland Pipeline opened, there's already a stigma, right? But it got worse when the parks closed because then all public property became skate park, right? So when the parks closed, people figured out how to skateboard on different terrain, including public plaza areas, handrails, benches, stairs, anything that has a bank or a steepness to it became the skate park. And that's when things really exploded and the sort of attitude towards skateboarding turned because they're a nuisance in the streets.
The loss of these skate parks basically traded one liability with another, since now pedestrians were more at risk of having an accident involving skateboarders, as the skateboarders themselves were pushed into places like back alleys and gutters. In an era where the parks were closed, though, the sport managed to survive through a decentralized media network, the VHS tape. Skate parks, as they're called, were filmed on portable cameras and traded in shops. These videos were how the sport spread. A kid in the Midwest could see what was happening in Venice Beach. As the number of skaters rapidly grew, the government's reaction to them only made things worse. Cities across California wrote ordinances that pushed skateboarding out of public spaces, with fines climbing as high as $500. Police were also authorized to seize boards on site. And so the law treated the activity as something between a public nuisance and vandalism. By the 1990s, many skateboarders, myself included, had a criminal record, and those records frequently offered no nuance to the situation. For example, in my case, the legal report read criminal damage to a hand railing on the porch of a funeral home of all places, so perhaps I deserved going to jail. But those other skaters, well, I'm sure they didn't. Though there was a PR pushback, such as popular slogans like "skateboarding is not a crime," spread through the nation on stickers and the back of minivans. With time, a compromise was created. In Venice Beach, a low concrete plaza called the Pavilion offered a safe haven. Skaters gathered there, and along the way, they added their own improvised features.
Closest thing to any sort of skate park in that area was the Venice Pit, because it had banks. People would bring ramps there because it was mostly abandoned. You know, the cops didn't care about that kind of spot. And there were, granted, it was a lot of homeless people, and it was just kind of an area that the tourists avoided. So it didn't get traction. It didn't get any sort of attention. So the skaters came there and just made it their own. And that became the default skate park in that area for years.
The pit wasn't just a skate spot, it was a counterculture melting pot. The graffiti-covered walls echoed with early West Coast punk and hip-hop. It was dangerous, loud, and partially self-policed. Local legend has it that if a tourist walked into the middle of the lines, they'd get yelled out of the plaza. And so this park became a symbol of Venice's raw, anti-establishment identity, which is exactly why city developers wanted it gone. It wouldn't last forever. The very thing that made the pit a sanctuary, its existence as an unofficial, abandoned space, was actually what led to its demise. The Venice Pavilion was demolished in 2000, and the skaters who had grown up inside its walls described the loss as having a piece of their home taken away. However, by this time, the PR pushback with those slogans like skateboarding is not a crime and major sporting events had indeed shaped public perspective. The 1995 debut of the X Games was perhaps the most significant turning point. By presenting skateboarding as a high-octane, organized extreme sport on national television, skaters suddenly found themselves with a layer of corporate legitimacy, demonstrating to city officials that the sport could be a spectator event with safety protocols, insurance, and a massive marketable audience. Skateboarding had become a legitimate athletic pursuit, and so skate parks would return. The thing that finally ended the war was a change in the law. For context, California granted many public agencies legal immunity in 1983 for what it considered hazardous recreational activities. This included things like rock climbing, skydiving, and similar pursuits. But skateboarding had been left off that list. More specifically, the turning point was California Assembly Bill 1296, which officially categorized skateboarding alongside skydiving under the state's government immunity laws. So what did the bill do? Well, basically, if a skater broke their wrist trying to perform a trick on a city-owned park, they assumed risk, not the taxpayers. So almost overnight, the legal floodgates opened, paving the way for the multi-million-dollar type of concrete plazas that we see today. So now that we've come full circle, let's have a look at what remains of those original parks. For the most part, California's first-generation parks have been wiped clean off the face of the earth. Take the Del Mar Skate Ranch, once the undisputed capital of vert skating. When it was bulldozed in '87, authorities didn't just want the park closed, they wanted the subculture gone. So they razed it to high hell. If you visit that same patch of land today, you'll find a suburban strip mall parking lot and a hotel. As for San Diego's other park, the Oasis, the city chose an entirely different, almost eerie method of burial. Apparently, developers simply filled in the world-famous 70-foot concrete tunnel and bowls with thousands of tons of dirt and gravel. So, although they've been sealed, the features are still down there, and it's not the only one to end up this way. Decades after Runway Park was filled in, a commercial construction project rediscovered the skate park relics when an excavator pierced the ground there. And apparently, when it did, a solid, smooth, perfectly preserved blue concrete bowl was revealed. Perhaps the most poetic legacy belongs to the Venice Beach Pavilion, better known as the Pit. When the city finally tore that park down, local skate activists refused to let its memory be completely erased. Actually, they managed to salvage massive, jagged chunks of the heavily graffitied concrete walls right out of the debris. Today, those relics have been preserved and are on permanent display as public art right next to the boardwalk, perhaps as something of a monument to an era when California went to war with skateboarding. So that's the story of California's lost skate parks. A special thanks to Tony for appearing on the show. Otherwise, as always, I'm Ryan Sokash, signing off.